At my own retirement party, I saw her lace my drink, smiling like it was a toast. Still, I took the glass, steady hands, eyes locked on hers. As her perfume curled between us, too sweet, too sharp, I remembered every time I let it slide. While guests cheered, she sipped first, like guilt could be hidden in a smile. The same bubbles she offered me carried more than celebration, they carried motive. That's when I raised my untouched glass and said, "To family," and the things we don't say out loud. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The laughter in my living room had that polished, hollow ring people use when they're trying to sound kind. Champagne glasses clinked, and the smell of roasted salmon mixed with lilies from the centerpiece. My own retirement party, 70 years old, 4 decades of work behind me, should have felt like triumph. Instead, the air buzzed with something sharp and artificial. Lauren's perfume cut through everything, sweet, floral, and far too strong. She floated near the bar, all practiced smiles and diamond earrings that sparkled like they were auditioning for a role. My daughter-in-law had insisted on planning the party, and I had agreed because saying no to her always turned into a performance. Nathan stood by the window talking to one of my old co-workers about golf, oblivious as ever. His smile was loose, untroubled. I wondered if he'd ever notice the tension that followed Lauren from room to room. Probably not. My son had never been good at seeing what was right in front of him. From across the room, I watched Lauren's hand glide toward the bar again. She moved too casually, slow, deliberate, but her eyes darted once toward me before she turned away. I'd seen enough in courtrooms and boardrooms to recognize a tell. Her fingers hovered above the glasses, and I caught the faint clink of a spoon stirring something that didn't belong. A hush flickered through the noise, just long enough for me to notice it, then the laughter resumed. I straightened my back, set down my empty plate, and started toward her. "Mom, you okay?" Nathan's voice cut through the crowd. "Perfectly fine," I said, smiling as if everything was normal. "Just going to get another drink." Lauren turned, already holding a flute of champagne. "Oh, let me," she chirped. "You've been on your feet all night." Her eyes sparkled, but the edge beneath them glinted even sharper. She handed me the glass she'd just been working on. I accepted it, letting the cold stem rest between my fingers. Across the room, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Pat Green. "Pat. Call Victor. Stay calm." My oldest friend, always with the perfect timing. I didn't lift the glass. Instead, I tilted it slightly, letting the light catch the bubbles. Something cloudy clung to the bottom, so faint most people wouldn't see it. Lauren's smile tightened. "A toast, Eleanor?" "To what exactly?" I asked softly. She blinked just once, then clinked her glass against mine. "To new beginnings." Her drink touched her lips first. A tiny sip, barely enough to taste. I noted it, memorized it. "New beginnings," I echoed. But I didn't drink. I turned away, letting the conversation swirl back around us. Pat approached from the hall, sharp-eyed behind her reading glasses. "Everything all right?" she murmured. "Depends on your definition," I replied under my breath. Nathan appeared again, hand on my shoulder. "You're not drinking?" Lauren picked a great bottle. "She did," I said evenly, setting my glass on the counter. "And she should enjoy it." Lauren's hand twitched. Just a flicker, but enough. She tried to recover, smiling wider. "Oh, come on, Ellie. Don't make me drink alone." "I would never," I said. "Go ahead. You first." The air thickened between us. She hesitated. Then, perhaps to prove her innocence, perhaps to keep her mask intact, she took a deeper sip. The tiniest tremor crossed her jaw before she forced it into a smile again. Pat's phone was already in her hand, typing something discreetly. I didn't need to ask who she was texting. I inhaled, steadying my pulse. Years of managing contracts and inheritance disputes had taught me the value of silence. People reveal more when you don't react. I checked my watch. 9:30. Too early for the party to end, but just late enough for things to start unraveling. Lauren turned to greet another guest, and I noticed her hand brushing the bar again, wiping something, perhaps a stray drop, perhaps evidence. I slipped away toward the corner where my phone sat charging and tapped Victor Lane's number. My attorney's voice came through quietly. "Eleanor, Pat messaged me. Are you all right?" "Perfectly fine," I said. "But I think my daughter-in-law made a mistake." "Do you want me to call the police?" "Not yet. I'd rather let her finish what she started." Victor exhaled slowly. "Then stay composed. I'll make sure all your estate documents are sealed as of tonight. No sudden emergency transfers. Understood?" "Perfectly," I said. When I hung up, the laughter behind me sounded different. Sharper, nervous, waiting. I turned just in time to see Lauren take another sip, her smile faltering as she met my eyes. I raised my untouched glass in a silent toast and whispered, "Cheers, my dear." The crowd clapped for something, a toast I hadn't heard, but my gaze stayed on her. She blinked once, then again, slower this time. And that was when I knew. The game had already begun. The room hummed again, the party trying to recover from a moment it didn't understand. Glasses clinked, music shifted to something livelier, and yet, there was an unease threading through the chatter. A ripple too small for most to notice, but not for me. Lauren was laughing too loudly now, her voice carried from the bar, brittle around the edges. The second sip had already done its quiet work. Her cheeks were flushed, her pupils uneven. No one else would connect it, but I watched every flicker of discomfort that crossed her face. I still hadn't touched my glass. It sat on the counter, golden bubbles rising and bursting like secrets refusing to stay buried. Nathan wandered over, smiling, oblivious to the current between the three of us. "Mom, everyone's asking for you to make a little speech before the cake," he said, his hand landing on my shoulder like a casual anchor. "You know, something about retirement, legacy, all that." "Of course," I said smoothly. "Just a moment." He grinned, already walking away, not noticing the way Lauren's hand tightened around her glass when I spoke. Pat appeared at my side, as silent and steady as ever. "Keep watching her," she murmured, pretending to adjust a stack of napkins. "The reaction will tell us what we need. Don't intervene yet." I nodded once. "Victor?" Pat slipped her phone toward me under the tablecloth, an open message thread. "Victor. All documentation sealed. If she causes a scene, you're covered. Bank access frozen until Monday morning. Sophie's on alert." I felt my shoulders drop a fraction. Years of managing high-stakes contracts had taught me how fast betrayal can turn into paperwork, and paperwork into control. Lauren turned then, catching my eye across the room. Her smile wobbled but held. She took another sip, too fast, too committed, and nearly coughed, covering it with a laugh. A few guests turned their heads. No one said anything. I let her have her stage. The lights from the chandelier scattered across her sequined dress, and she looked almost beautiful in that glittering, poisonous way a wasp might look under glass. I watched her composure fray, thread by thread. Pat leaned closer. "She's overcompensating. Give her rope." "I always do," I said softly. Across the room, Sophie Kim, my quiet, competent liaison from the bank, had just arrived. She stood near the door, an unobtrusive presence in a navy dress and low heels, her tablet tucked under her arm. Her eyes met mine briefly, and she gave the smallest nod. That was all I needed. Everything of value, accounts, properties, securities, was already under watch. Even if Lauren thought she could use tonight's chaos to her advantage, she was walking on sand. The clinking of forks against glasses drew everyone's attention again. Nathan stood, trying to herd the crowd into focus. "All right, everyone, let's toast to the woman of the hour." Applause scattered, uneven but earnest. Lauren forced her way back to my side, her perfume wrapping around me like static. She held her glass up again. "To Eleanor Parker," she said brightly, "a woman who never misses a thing." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. I smiled as if I hadn't noticed. "To never missing a thing," I echoed, my gaze steady. We touched rims again, the faintest click of crystal. I watched her drink. I didn't. The moment hung between us, invisible to the crowd. Everyone else laughed, clapped, cheered. But Lauren's pupils narrowed, her skin paling by a shade. She lowered her glass too quickly, setting it on the table and pretending to dab her lips. Pat's phone vibrated once more. She glanced at it and mouthed, "Victor says, document everything." I turned, pretending to greet another guest, and caught my reflection in the window. Calm, elegant, unshaken. But beneath that veneer, my mind was already organizing the next moves. Let her think she'd gotten away with it. Let her sweat through her smile. There's more power in letting someone wonder what you know than in showing your hand. Sophie slipped past me quietly, murmuring, "Everything's locked. Nothing can be touched without your approval." "Thank you," I whispered. Lauren's laughter faltered again. She pressed a hand briefly to her stomach, then waved it off, smiling too brightly at a group of guests who were already whispering. Nathan laughed, oblivious, tapping his glass. "All right, Mom, your turn to say something." All eyes turned to me. I rose, hands steady, and stepped into the light. I could feel Lauren watching, searching my face for any sign of accusation or fear. There was none. I lifted my untouched glass. "I've spent a lifetime learning that people always show you who they are," I said evenly. "You just have to watch closely enough." A few polite laughs rolled through the crowd, but Pat caught the subtext. Lauren's face drained a shade paler. I smiled and continued. "Tonight, I'm grateful. For clarity, for loyalty, and for knowing exactly where I stand." When I sat down again, Lauren's glass was nearly empty, and the tremor in her hand was no longer subtle. Pat leaned in. "She's unraveling," she whispered. "Good," I said, my eyes still on the untouched drink beside me. "Let her think she's the only one watching." Lauren set her glass down too hard. Champagne sloshed onto the tablecloth. A few guests gasped. Nathan hurried over, and in the commotion, no one noticed the flicker of something cold in my smile. Because the next move would be mine. The guests had drifted into smaller clusters, laughter thinning into murmurs that carried the faint edge of curiosity. Something had shifted in the room. Something they couldn't name, but they could feel. That subtle instinct people have when they sense a story unfolding but haven't yet found the headline. I sat at the edge of my own party, the untouched champagne still glittering in front of me, and quietly began taking inventory. To my left, the older colleagues from my firm, two couples who'd known me for decades, were whispering behind napkins, trying to look sympathetic but failing to hide the intrigue in their eyes. Across the room, Lauren's friends, newer, louder, the kind who never remembered anyone's last name, were pretending not to stare at her as she leaned against the bar, her complexion a few shades paler than when she'd arrived. Every expression, every nervous glance, every whispered exchange went into a quiet ledger in my mind. Witnesses. Pat's hand brushed my shoulder as she passed behind me, the briefest signal. I followed her movement toward the hallway, where she paused under the warm light of the sconces and adjusted her reading glasses. That was our language for come now, privately. I joined her, steadying the folds of my navy silk dress as we stepped out of sight from the guests. "She's losing her center," Pat said quietly. "Tried to laugh it off, but she's unsteady. You saw that spill?" "I did," I said. "And everyone else did too." Pat smiled without humor. "Good. I'm noting names. The two from your firm saw it up close. So did the bank liaison." "Sophie," I corrected softly. "Her name is Sophie Kim. And yes, she never misses details." As if on cue, Sophie appeared at the end of the hall, tablet still in hand, phone pressed to her ear. "Everything's confirmed," she said, lowering her voice. "Your accounts are double-locked. I flagged any unusual access attempts earlier today. Nothing yet, but I'm watching." "Perfect," I said. "Keep it that way until I say otherwise." Her gaze flicked toward the living room. "Do you want me to pull Nathan aside?" "Not yet. Let him stay in the dark a little longer." Sophie gave a crisp nod, then melted back into the party. Pat folded her arms. "So what's your next move?" "Observation phase is over," I said. "Now I set the stage. If she wants a scene, she'll have one. But not the one she planned." We returned to the dining area, where laughter had turned brittle again. I caught snippets. Someone asking if Lauren was all right, someone else commenting on how pale she looked. The music had dulled, but no one dared stop it. Lauren looked up as I entered, eyes glassy under the chandelier. "Eleanor," she called, voice bright but shaking slightly. "Everyone's waiting for cake." I smiled. "Of course. Let's not keep them waiting." As I passed, I noticed her glass was empty again. She'd drained it completely. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Victor's text appeared on my phone as I reached the dining table. "Victor. Estate and property files sealed as of 9:52 p.m. Trust confirmation in progress. You're untouchable." Untouchable. The word settled through me like warmth from a long-awaited fire. The cake arrived. Chocolate, elegant, excessive. Lauren insisted on slicing it herself, though her hand wobbled. She laughed it off, muttering something about too much champagne. A few guests chuckled politely, but Pat and I shared a glance. Every shaky gesture was another nail in the narrative coffin she was building for herself. Nathan approached me mid-slice, cheeks flushed from wine and ignorance. "You sure you're okay, Mom?" he asked. "Lauren said you looked tired." "I'm fine," I said with a small, serene smile. "But you might want to keep an eye on your wife." He blinked, confused, glancing toward the bar. "She's fine," he said automatically. "Of course," I replied. "For now." Pat coughed lightly into her napkin to hide a smirk. The guests began singing, off-key, cheerful, oblivious, and for a moment the whole room glowed with that strange warmth that comes before a storm breaks. Candles flickered against the frosting, and in their reflection I saw Lauren watching me, her eyes wide, searching for something. She expected accusation, maybe confrontation, but I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I raised my glass, still untouched, and said quietly, "To family." The crowd echoed the toast, voices overlapping. "To family." Lauren repeated it last, barely audible, her hand trembling slightly as she set the knife down. Pat leaned close enough for only me to hear. "They're all watching her now. You've turned the room without a word." "That's the idea," I murmured. As the guests returned to conversation and laughter, I stepped toward the window, pretending to admire the view. My reflection stared back at me, composed, certain, deliberate. Behind me, Lauren stumbled slightly as she tried to navigate between guests. In her reflection, I saw her wipe her hand across her mouth, confusion flickering like static in her eyes. I didn't turn around, I just smiled, a small, knowing curve that no one but she would understand. Let her wonder if I'd seen. Let her wonder how much I knew. Because the truth was, by the time she realized what I'd set in motion, it would be far too late to stop it. The song had barely ended when the lights flickered from the candle's glow to the soft chandelier overhead. The sound of silverware against plates filled the silence that followed, polite and expectant. Everyone waited for something, though no one knew what. Lauren leaned against the bar again, her face ghostly beneath the warm light. Her laughter had drained into tight, clipped giggles. The way she gripped the edge of the counter told me her balance was slipping. The spiked glass, the one she'd poured so confidently, still sat beside her half empty. She glanced at it now and then, uncertain whether to finish it or abandon the evidence. Pat caught my eye across the room, her expression calm but alert, like a referee who already knew which side had lost. I moved slowly through the guests, exchanging smiles, light touches on shoulders, the kind of gracious gestures that hid intent. "How's the cake?" I asked a coworker. "Too rich?" Lauren's hand jerked slightly, the fork clinking against her plate. Every sound she made now felt amplified in the stillness gathering around her. Nathan approached her, brow furrowed. "Lauren, are you okay? You're white as a sheet." She forced a laugh. "Just champagne bubbles," she said, though her words slurred faintly at the edges. Her reflection caught my attention again in the glass door, her lips parted, her eyes darting between her drink and me. She knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to realize something had gone wrong. I turned, perfectly composed, and called lightly, "Lauren, darling, you haven't finished your toast." Heads turned. The conversation dimmed. She froze, eyes widening as if I'd pulled a string she didn't know was attached. "Oh, right," she stammered. Just a moment." Pat stood near the dessert table, phone discreetly angled to record. "Steady," she murmured behind a polite smile as though complimenting the frosting. Lauren lifted her glass, and for a heartbeat I thought she might refuse, but she didn't. She took a breath, raised it shakily, and forced the brightest smile she could muster. "To Eleanor," she said again, her voice trembling. "To a remarkable woman." She drank. And this time, the reaction was immediate. Her body stiffened. She set the glass down too hard, spilling some across the white linen. A brittle silence followed the sound. Then she blinked rapidly, mouth twitching as if the flavor had turned to metal. Her hand went to her stomach. She forced a laugh that broke halfway through. Nathan stepped closer. "Lauren?" "I'm fine," she said, but her voice cracked on the word. Her eyes darted toward me, wide, frightened, searching for a lifeline she wouldn't find. The guests began whispering, their curiosity sharpening like the scent of ozone before a storm. A few exchanged looks. Others shifted uncomfortably. They'd seen her pour the drinks earlier, perhaps not closely, but enough to remember. "Maybe you should sit," Nathan said, his voice uncertain now. She waved him off, stumbling slightly. I said, "I'm fine." Her denial only deepened the silence. Pat took a small step forward, her phone lowered now, her gaze fixed on Lauren. "Eleanor," she said softly, "why don't you call Victor? He might want to know about this." The mention of Victor's name snapped Lauren's attention back to me. Her face went pale. She knew who he was. My attorney, my protector, my fail-safe. I took out my phone and pressed the side button once. The call was already queued. "Victor," I said quietly, "it seems we've had a bit of an incident." His voice came through calm, steady. "I'm on speaker, Eleanor. Are there witnesses?" "Plenty," I said, glancing around the room. You could say the evening took an unexpected turn. A few of the guests chuckled nervously, unsure whether this was a joke. Victor's tone didn't waver. "Then let's proceed carefully. No accusations yet. Just ensure your glass stays untouched and she receives appropriate attention. Lauren's knees buckled slightly, and Nathan caught her arm. Honey, what's going on? Did you... He stopped mid-sentence, realization dawning in his eyes. His gaze flicked to the glasses on the bar, then to me. Mom, what's happening? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Pat moved closer, guiding the room without speaking. Everyone, give her some air, she said, her voice the gentle command of a woman who had raised children, hosted fundraisers, managed chaos before breakfast. The guests complied, forming a loose circle around the scene. Their murmurs filled the air. Was she sick? What happened? Did she drink too much? Lauren pressed her hands to her face, her voice shaking. I don't know what's wrong, she whispered. It tastes... She cut herself off, realizing too late what she was admitting. Nathan's head snapped toward her. What do you mean, tastes? Pat turned toward me, her eyes sharp. Well, she said in a tone pitched for the audience, at least you didn't drink yours, Eleanor. And there it was, the moment of revelation, clean and surgical. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Lauren froze, her eyes wide and glassy, horror creeping up her throat. Nathan's hand dropped from her arm, the space between them turned heavy, brittle. I held her gaze and said softly, No, I didn't. Silence rippled outward, thick and electric. Victor's voice murmured from my phone. Good. Whatever happens next, you're legally shielded. I'll document the timeline immediately. Pat slipped her phone into her clutch, satisfied. Then I suppose that's that, she said quietly. Lauren stared at me, her mouth opening but no sound coming out. Around us, the guests' whispers grew into a low hum of disbelief. Nathan's voice broke through it, tight with confusion and shame. Lauren, what did you do? She shook her head helplessly, lips trembling. I didn't... But no one believed her now. I turned away before she could finish the lie, letting my calm settle the chaos. My reflection in the glass door was the same as it had been all evening, steady, controlled, unflinching. Behind me, Lauren's voice cracked again, pleading now, but drowned beneath the noise of murmured judgment. The balance had shifted, and for the first time that night she realized she wasn't the one holding the power. The room had fallen into the kind of silence people pretend isn't happening. Forks lifted halfway to mouths, eyes darting from one face to another, smiles frozen in place. The party music still played, absurdly cheerful, until someone had the sense to turn it off. Lauren stood at the center of it all, pale and trembling. Her sequined dress caught the light like shattered glass, but there was no brilliance left in her eyes. Nathan hovered beside her, confused, embarrassed, already halfway to anger but unsure where to place it. I, meanwhile, sat at the head of the table as if nothing at all had gone wrong. My hands were steady. My breathing was slow. Decades of negotiating under pressure had taught me one thing: panic never wins a room. Mom, Nathan said cautiously, maybe we should call someone. A doctor? Or... Victor's voice buzzed from my phone before I could answer. I've contacted medical support just in case. But legally, Eleanor, you're in the clear. The drink you were offered remains untouched, and I've time-stamped all relevant communications. Nathan blinked. You already talked to your lawyer? I turned to him, serene. Of course, dear. I handle my affairs with foresight. Lauren swayed slightly, clutching the edge of the table. You're making this look like I... Pat cut her off gently, her tone deceptively kind. Lauren, sweetie, maybe you should sit down. You don't look well. Lauren's lips parted, but no words came out. She sank into the nearest chair, hands shaking as she tried to steady her glass of water. The guests had begun to murmur again, a growing tide of whispers that filled every gap in conversation. They didn't need to know the details. They'd already decided where their sympathies lay. Pat took a slow breath, surveying the room as though she were mentally cataloging every face, every witness. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any accusation. I let the quiet do the work. I'd learned long ago that silence, in the right hands, can be the sharpest instrument of all. Lauren's voice came out small. "You all think I—" She stopped herself, shaking her head, as if denying it could rewind the last 10 minutes. Nathan rubbed a hand over his face. "Lauren, just stop. Please." His tone wasn't angry yet. It was weary, ashamed. And that was worse for her. Across the table, Sophie Kim approached discreetly, her tablet tucked to her chest. "Mrs. Parker," she murmured. "Victor's office confirmed all estate accounts are now locked. No transfers, no access, no adjustments until your signature clears." Lauren's head snapped up. "What?" I didn't look at her when I replied. "A precaution. I thought it best, after what just happened." Her mouth opened and closed again. "You can't—" "I can," I said, still calm. And I did. Pat hid a smile behind her champagne flute. Nathan turned toward me, frowning. "Mom, what does she mean? Locked accounts?" I folded my napkin neatly on the table. "Exactly that. Everything's secured. There will be no confusion about authority, now or later." He hesitated, torn between loyalty and realization. "You mean the estate?" "The entire portfolio," I confirmed. "Every document Victor has prepared is legally sound, reviewed, and active as of this evening." Pat set down her glass. "That's what I love about you, Eleanor," she said lightly. "Always 2 steps ahead." Lauren's breath hitched. You can't just change things without—" I finally looked at her. "Without whose permission, Lauren? Yours?" The words landed with a soft, final weight. The guests heard them. They didn't move. But I could feel the shift. The moment they stopped looking at me like a target and started looking at me like someone who had already won. Lauren's face crumpled, panic flooding in to replace outrage. "Nathan, she's cutting us out. Don't you see what she's doing?" Nathan's reply came quietly, his voice thin and uncertain. "I think she's protecting what's hers." For a moment, the air left the room. Victor's voice returned through my phone, a steady presence anchoring the moment. "Eleanor, the trust revisions have taken effect. Legally, no one but you can access or alter holdings. I've also secured your power of attorney. You're covered from every angle." Pat gave a small nod, satisfied. "And that," she whispered, "is how you draw a line." Lauren turned toward me, desperation breaking through her composure. "You planned this," she said. "You planned all of it." I tilted my head. "I planned to retire, Lauren. Everything else was your doing." The crowd began to disperse slightly, trying to find safe conversational ground, but no one could look away entirely. A few old friends exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen similar implosions play out in boardrooms, just never so elegantly. Pat leaned close enough for me to hear. "You know she just realized, don't you?" "Realized what?" I asked softly, though I already knew. "That she doesn't own a single thing in this house. Or anywhere else." I smiled faintly, watching Lauren as she sat hunched and shaking, eyes wide with the dawning horror of it. "Good," I said. "Let that sink in before she tries to rewrite the story." Nathan stared down at the table, the tension in his shoulders heavy and visible. For the first time, he didn't rush to defend her. Pat took out her phone and tapped a few quick notes. "Timelines logged," she said. "Every reaction documented." Lauren looked from face to face, searching for sympathy. There was none. I rose slowly, my movements measured and deliberate. If you'll excuse me, I said. I think the evening has reached its natural conclusion. No one stopped me. Behind me, the low hum of conversation began again, uneasy, fractured. But the sound that followed me to the doorway was Lauren's voice, low and trembling. She can't do this, she whispered to no one in particular. She can't. Pat's reply drifted after me, calm and almost kind. She already has. And I smiled to myself, quiet and certain, knowing that the first move in a much longer game had been made. By the time the last guest's car rolled out of the driveway, the night air over Denver had gone cold and sharp. The silence that replaced the party's chatter felt almost medicinal, clean, precise, and deliberate. I stood by the window for a moment, watching the reflection of the string lights tremble on the glass, my champagne still untouched. Behind me, Lauren's heels clicked erratically against the hardwood. "You think this is over?" she hissed, her voice barely steady. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." Pat was gathering dishes with unhurried elegance, her tone mild. "No one humiliated you, dear. You did that all on your own." Lauren turned on her, trembling with anger. "Stay out of this, Patricia." Pat's gaze stayed calm. "I will, as soon as you leave this house." Nathan appeared from the hall, jacket half on, eyes red from quiet shock. "Lauren, maybe we should go, it's been a long night." But she wasn't ready to retreat. "I want to see the papers," she snapped, turning toward me. "You think you can just lock everything up and leave us with nothing? I have a right to know what you did." Her voice cracked at the end. The power she'd wielded all these years, subtle, manipulative, relentless, had slipped through her hands like sand. I didn't move from the window. "You had a right to be part of this family," I said quietly. "You forfeited that when you decided to poison it." She froze. The phrasing wasn't accidental. Neither was the way Nathan's head lifted sharply at the word poison. Before she could answer, my phone buzzed on the side table. I didn't need to check who it was. "Sophie," I said, answering smoothly. Her voice came through crisp, efficient, as always. "Mrs. Parker, I've confirmed your accounts are fully secured. Access attempts have already been logged, 3 unsuccessful, all traced to a Denver IP." Lauren's eyes flicked toward Nathan's laptop bag sitting by the stairs. She knew what Sophie meant before I said a word. "Thank you, Sophie," I said evenly. "Please continue monitoring activity through Monday, and freeze any secondary attempts at entry. No alerts to the other parties yet." "Understood," she replied. "Victor also asked me to remind you, your primary trust instruments are now permanent. Any change requests would require notarized approval from both him and myself." Lauren's voice rose, shrill and desperate. "You can't! This is illegal. It has to be. Nathan, say something." Nathan rubbed his temples. "Lauren, stop, please. You're making this worse." "Worse?" she snapped. "She's cutting us off." I finally turned. My expression stayed calm, but my voice had cooled to iron. "I'm protecting my assets, Lauren, the ones your behavior put at risk. Don't confuse prudence with cruelty." Pat set down a plate with a soft clink. "She warned you in her own way," she said. "You just weren't listening." Lauren's hands balled into fists. "You can't just freeze us out of everything." "I can," I said, "and according to Victor, I already have." Right on cue, a second call flashed across the screen. I put it on speaker. "Victor. Eleanor. I've reviewed the account status. Everything is locked and protected under the trust clause. Any attempts to withdraw or modify are automatically flagged and denied." Lauren stepped forward, trembling. "You can't talk about me like I'm not standing here." Victor's voice didn't waver. "Then perhaps you should have considered that before tampering with a drink at a public gathering. There are witnesses, Mrs. Parker. You might consider silence your best legal defense." Her face blanched completely. Nathan ran a hand through his hair. My God, Lauren, he muttered. Victor continued, precise and cool. Eleanor, I'll have a written statement prepared by morning. You're completely insulated. The trust is now immutable. No external access possible. Congratulations on your retirement, by the way. Thank you, Victor, I said. You've been invaluable. Pat let out the faintest breath of laughter, quiet enough not to be cruel. When the line disconnected, the room felt smaller somehow, tighter, quieter. Lauren's breathing had turned ragged. You've turned my husband against me, she whispered. I shook my head. No, Lauren, you did that yourself. Nathan didn't speak. He just stared at the floor, shoulders heavy. Sophie's text buzzed through moments later. Sophie. Final confirmation, everything's secure. She can't touch a dime. I didn't reply, just locked the screen. Lauren's voice broke through the silence. This isn't finished. Pat smiled faintly. Oh, I think it is. Lauren looked around the room as if realizing for the first time how little of it belonged to her. The paintings she'd mocked, the piano she never played, the rugs she'd once called outdated. Everything bore my history, not hers. Her gaze finally landed back on me. You think this house will protect you? No, I said, my tone quiet but absolute. The law will. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint echo of the wind against the windows. Pat gathered her purse and straightened her shawl. I'll stay the night, she said softly, just in case she tries anything foolish. Thank you, I said. But she's not going to touch a thing. Not anymore. Lauren glared, trembling, and took a shaky step backward toward the hallway. You'll regret this, she whispered. I smiled, small, restrained, victorious. I rarely regret what I've already foreseen. She turned, her heels scraping against the wood as she disappeared into the guest room to collect her things. Nathan lingered, eyes shadowed. Mom, he said quietly. I don't even know what to say. Then don't, I replied. Just pay attention. You'll need to know how power really works someday. As he walked out, the tension left the air, replaced by something cleaner, colder. Pat sank into the armchair beside me. Well, she said, you've drawn the borders. Now she knows exactly what she can't touch. I looked toward the window again, where the reflection of the empty champagne glass shimmered faintly in the dim light. She tried to poison what's mine, I murmured. Now she gets to live with the taste. Outside, a car door slammed, then silence. And for the first time that night, I let myself breathe. The next morning, sunlight crept over the snow-dusted rooftops of Denver, painting the kitchen in soft gold. The air was still, too still, and I could almost feel the echo of last night lingering like the faint scent of champagne. Pat was already up, sitting at the breakfast nook with a cup of black coffee and her usual crossword. Her presence had the kind of calm weight that filled a room without effort. She looked up as I entered. You slept? She asked, one eyebrow raised. Deeply, I said, pouring myself tea. There's nothing like legal security for a good night's rest. Pat chuckled, her voice low. You should put that on a pillow. From the hallway came the muffled sound of a suitcase zipper, followed by quiet, angry whispers. Lauren. She appeared a moment later, sunglasses hiding her swollen eyes, her hair pulled back too tight. Nathan trailed behind her, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and exhaustion. Good morning, I said, my tone pleasant, almost cordial. Lauren ignored me, clutching the handle of her suitcase as though it could shield her. Nathan cleared his throat. We're going to stay at the hotel for a few days, he said, just until things settle. Of course, I said lightly. There's a Hyatt not far from the attorney's office. Very convenient. Pat took a sip of coffee to hide her smile. Lauren's lips thinned. You think this is funny? She asked. Not at all, I said. I think it's appropriate. Her jaw tightened. You've destroyed this family. I tilted my head. No, Lauren. I've merely shown you where the boundaries are. Pat looked up from her crossword. They were always there, dear. You just didn't notice until you tripped over them. Lauren's cheeks flushed crimson. I don't have to stand here and be insulted. Then don't, I said simply. The door's right behind you. She hesitated, waiting for Nathan to say something. When he didn't, she grabbed her bag and marched toward the foyer, muttering under her breath. The front door opened, then slammed. Nathan lingered in the doorway. You didn't have to do it this way, he said quietly. I set my cup down. Do what exactly? Protect myself? Protect the estate your father built? He winced, looking down at his shoes. You could have told me? I softened just enough to let him breathe. Would you have listened? He didn't answer. From the corner, Pat murmured, He's his mother's son, but he's learning. Nathan glanced at her, then at me. Victor called me this morning, he said. He confirmed everything's official, irrevocable. I just didn't realize how fast you moved. I smiled faintly. That's the point of a contingency plan, Nathan. It moves faster than anyone expects. He nodded slowly, the understanding dawning behind his frustration. She tried to log into your account last night, didn't she? I didn't need to reply. The look on his face told me he already knew the answer. He exhaled. You're right, Mom. She's been careless. I just wish it didn't have to happen like this. Pat leaned back in her chair. Sometimes it has to. People don't respect what they think they can outsmart. The silence that followed was not hostile. It was something quieter, weightier. Acceptance, maybe. Nathan rubbed the back of his neck. She won't stop, he said finally. You know that. I met his gaze. Neither will I. He gave a small, tired smile, one that reminded me of the boy who used to come home from school determined to prove himself. Then he picked up his jacket. I'll call you later. When he left, the house exhaled. Pat folded her newspaper and said, You handled that beautifully. No shouting, no theatrics, just pure control. I turned toward the window, watching the thin veil of frost melting on the glass. Control isn't about volume, Pat, it's about direction. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Victor. Victor. All documents have cleared verification. The trust and estate protections are legally binding, permanent, and unchallengeable. Rest easy, Eleanor. I texted back one word. Done. Pat refilled her coffee. You know, I never tire of watching you dismantle a threat without ever raising your voice. I gave her a sidelong glance. That's because most people mistake composure for weakness. It's always their last mistake. Outside, a delivery van slowed in front of the house, then rolled away. The neighborhood was peaceful again, too peaceful for what had just unfolded here. Pat rose and stretched. What's next? I smiled into my tea. Oh, there's always a next. But for now, I think I'll enjoy the quiet. The sunlight caught the rim of my glass again, golden and steady, the same untouched drink from last night. I lifted it at last, not to toast, but to mark the end of something. Lauren thought she could rewrite my story. She'd forgotten I've been holding the pen all along. The phone buzzed again, a new message from an unknown number. Unknown. You may think this is over. It isn't. I read it twice, then set the phone down with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Because if Lauren wanted another round, she'd soon learn I'd already built the board, and every move she made would still belong to me. By Monday morning, the calm I'd built over the weekend felt almost orchestral. Every note deliberate, every silence intentional. The scandal from the party had already dissolved into rumor, softened by distance and embarrassment. People rarely spoke openly about betrayal. They preferred to dress it up as unfortunate misunderstanding. I let them. It made the truth easier to control. The estate office downtown smelled faintly of cedar and fresh paper when I walked in. Sophie Kim was already there, standing beside a glass-walled conference room, tablet in hand. "Morning, Mrs. Parker," she greeted, professional and composed. "Victor's running a few minutes behind, but the documents are ready for signature." Pat, trailing just behind me, looked around approvingly. "You know, it's almost poetic," she said. "The woman who spiked your drink ends up sober-faced at a lawyer's mercy." I smiled. Poetic, yes, but more importantly, legally binding. Sophie led us inside. Neatly arranged folders sat on the table, each tab labeled in Victor's meticulous handwriting. Across the top sheet, bold print read, "Estate Control, Irrevocable Asset Trust." When Victor entered, his suit was as immaculate as ever, his calm demeanor steadying the air. "Eleanor," he said warmly, shaking my hand, "I trust the weekend passed without incident." "Other than a few melodramatic text messages, it was perfectly peaceful," I replied. Pat smirked. "You mean Lauren's digital tantrum?" "Precisely," I said, "though I imagine she's running out of leverage." Victor sat, opening his briefcase with practiced precision. "That's already been confirmed. The bank attempted an automatic verification call on one of your frozen accounts, likely triggered by her guessing credentials. Sophie intercepted and rerouted it to me. She won't get far." Lauren's impulsiveness was her fatal flaw, one I'd counted on since the first day she'd married my son. She could never resist pressing a button just to see what happened. Sophie slid a tablet across the table. "Here are the updated holdings. Your investment accounts are consolidated under the primary trust, and any future financial decisions require dual authorization, mine and Victor's." Pat leaned back, impressed. "That's an iron cage, Eleanor. Elegant." I traced my finger over the digital documents, admiring the simplicity of it all. "Iron doesn't rust when you keep it clean." Victor handed me a pen. "Sign here, and every remaining loophole closes permanently." The tip of the pen scratched softly across the paper, a sound I found deeply satisfying. When I looked up, Victor's expression had shifted from professionalism to quiet admiration. "You've effectively removed every external vulnerability," he said. "Not just Lauren's, anyone's." Pat gave a soft laugh. "Well, gentlemen do love a woman who plans her revenge in legalese." Victor chuckled under his breath. "It's not revenge when it's rational." Sophie smiled faintly. "It's strategy." Exactly. By noon, the formalities were complete. My estate, my company's shares, my retirement assets, all sealed, inaccessible to anyone but me. When I stepped outside, the Denver air felt lighter somehow, as though the city itself had bent slightly to accommodate my control. Nathan called as I reached my car. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom," he began, his voice hesitant, "Lauren's been trying to figure out what happens next." "What happens next," I said, "is nothing. She's out of moves. She says she'll go public. About the party. About what you did." I smiled, sliding into the driver's seat. "Then she'll remind the world she spiked a 70-year-old woman's drink at her own retirement celebration. I doubt that's the legacy she wants." He sighed. "She's desperate, Mom." "You've got her cornered." "Then perhaps she'll finally learn what integrity looks like from there." Nathan was silent for a long moment. "You always said patience wins. I never really understood it until now." "It's not patience," I corrected softly. "It's timing." When the call ended, Pat climbed into the passenger seat beside me, slipping her sunglasses on. "So," she said lightly, "Denver society has its newest legend." I'm too old for legends, I said. I prefer documentation. She laughed, shaking her head. You've just dismantled a woman's illusion of power without raising your voice, Eleanor. That's not documentation. That's art. As we drove toward my home, the skyline shimmered in the afternoon sun. Glass and steel, untouchable, like the life I'd just locked behind legal fortresses. When we arrived, the answering machine light blinked red. I pressed play, expecting silence. Instead, Lauren's voice filled the kitchen, trembling with fury. You can hide behind your lawyers all you want, Eleanor, but you don't get to erase me. You think money and papers will protect you? We'll see about that. Pat exhaled sharply. She's going to make a mess before she burns out. She'll try, I said, pouring tea with steady hands. But she'll only find smoke. There's nothing left for her to touch. Outside, the sun was lowering, streaking the snow with amber light. The world felt quieter, but not finished. I could sense the next ripple building. Something unseen. Inevitable. Pat sipped her tea. So what's next in your grand orchestration? I looked toward the darkening horizon. Let her make noise. The louder she gets, the more everyone will hear how hollow she sounds. The phone buzzed again. Another message. This one not from Lauren. Unknown. Check the paper tomorrow. I stared at the screen, pulse steady but sharp. Pat leaned closer. New move? Perhaps, I murmured, but she's playing on my timetable now. And as I stood there, the city lights flickering to life beyond the window, I realized the truth of it. Control wasn't about possession or punishment. It was about rhythm. And in this game, I was the only one keeping time. The next morning, sunlight broke through the frost, spilling across the marble countertop like quiet revelation. I was stirring sugar into my coffee when Pat walked in, folded newspaper in hand. Her expression hovered between delight and disbelief. You might want to see this, she said, setting the paper beside my cup. The Denver Chronicle headline read, Socialite's retirement party ends in alleged poisoning scandal. There was no mistaking the photo. My living room, the gold and cream decor, my guests frozen mid-toast. But the focus wasn't on me. It was on Lauren, mouth open, eyes wide, the picture of panic. Pat chuckled softly. They didn't even have to mention her name. The image says everything. I picked up the paper, scanning the story. It was crafted delicately. No direct accusations, just suggestions. Sources confirm the matriarch remained unharmed. Authorities report no evidence of criminal wrongdoing. The family has chosen not to comment. Victor had done his work well. He'd ensured that the narrative would lean my way without ever sounding orchestrated. Lauren must be livid, Pat said, sipping her coffee. She's always been dramatic, I replied. Now she just has an audience. Before I could take another sip, my phone vibrated across the counter. A text from Nathan. Nathan. Mom, you need to see what people are saying online. Pat and I exchanged a look. She pulled out her tablet, opened a news feed, and within seconds, the world was already spinning the story. Commenters were brutal. Poor woman. Imagine someone trying to hurt her at her own party. That daughter-in-law always struck me as entitled. You can't buy class, but apparently you can lose your dignity at a retirement party. I scrolled slowly, unhurried, letting the words wash over me. There it was. The quiet recognition I hadn't needed, but knew would come. The kind that wasn't shouted from rooftops but whispered between charity circles, board luncheons, and country club brunches. The recognition they hadn't earned. Victor called an hour later, his tone a mixture of triumph and restraint. Eleanor, congratulations. The narrative solidified. Public sympathy is entirely in your favor, and Lauren's name is being handled as an unfortunate afterthought. I assume the protection's held? I asked. Impenetrable? He said. Your trust structure is bulletproof. Even if she tries a civil claim, it'll collapse under the weight of your documentation. Pat leaned closer to the speaker. So we're officially untouchable? Victor hesitated, amused. If there were a stronger word for it, I'd use that. Perfect, I said. Let's keep it that way. When the call ended, Pat exhaled, smiling. You've done it. You've turned a scandal into a coronation. I looked down at the paper again. No, I said quietly. I've turned a mistake into a message. By noon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Well-meaning texts, invitations for coffee, quiet apologies from guests who'd frozen at the wrong moment. Denver's social ecosystem had always been predictable. Nobody wanted to be seen on the wrong side of composure. Pat perched on the edge of the sofa, watching as I replied to none of them. You're enjoying this, she said. I smiled faintly. Not enjoyment. Satisfaction. At 2:00, Sophie arrived with a portfolio of follow-ups. All financial instruments remain sealed, she said efficiently. No breaches, no flags. But I thought you might want to see this. She handed me a printout. A local magazine headline. Elegance Under Fire, the Unshakable Grace of Eleanor Parker. Pat nearly spilled her tea laughing. Oh my God. They're turning you into a folk hero. I skimmed the first few lines. Careful praise, veiled admiration, the kind of soft-spoken adoration society reserved for women who'd survived scandal without breaking a nail. Sophie smiled. The editor's assistant reached out to Victor's office for a quote. He declined, of course, but he forwarded your contact information in case you'd like to approve a photo. Approval, I repeated, tracing the headline with my fingertip. That's always where power hides, in who gets the final say. Pat folded her arms. You've won the public. What's left to conquer? I looked toward the window. Snow had started again, thin, silent flakes falling over the city that now seemed to hum with my rhythm. They can admire what they like, I said, but admiration fades. Control doesn't. At that moment, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered, expecting another reporter. Instead, a voice I hadn't heard since the party, sharp and quivering with restrained fury. You think this is victory? Lauren's tone was acid. You think they love you? Wait until they know what you really are. I didn't flinch. They already do, Lauren. That's why they're applauding. She inhaled, shaky. You can't control everything forever. Maybe not, I said softly. But I can control you. The silence that followed was the cleanest sound I'd heard all day. Then the line went dead. Pat exhaled. She's unraveling faster than I expected. She's learning that control isn't a moment, I said. It's a habit. I folded the newspaper neatly and set it aside. On the table, my untouched tea had gone cool, its surface calm and reflective. In it, I saw the faint shimmer of my own expression, steady, patient, unrelenting. Pat leaned back with a grin. You do realize, don't you? You're the story now. I met her gaze. Yes, I said, but only because I wrote it first. And as the city's chatter grew louder beyond the frosted windows, I realized the true victory wasn't in exposure or applause, it was in orchestration. They would talk and whisper and speculate, and all of it would lead back to one conclusion. Eleanor Parker didn't survive the scandal. She conducted it. The snow was still falling when I woke, soft and soundless, like the world had decided to whisper. The city outside my window was blanketed in white, even the trees bowing slightly under its quiet weight. For the first time in weeks, there was no phone buzzing, no reporter's number flashing, no tension coiled under my ribs, only calm. I made my tea the way I always did. 1 cube of sugar, a single slice of lemon, and carried it to the kitchen window. The glass was cool beneath my fingertips, the reflection softer than I remembered. Pat was already there, wrapped in my late husband's old robe, reading the Chronicle as if it were a novel she'd been following for years. "You made page 3 again," she said without looking up. "Local philanthropist displays grace under pressure. They're calling you Denver's steel magnolia." I laughed quietly. I prefer steel without the floral metaphor. Pat smiled behind her mug. "Still, public adoration suits you." "It's fleeting," I said. "Admiration always is, but the structure holds." The clock on the wall ticked gently. 9:42 a.m., no calls from Nathan, no messages from Lauren. Silence had never sounded so decisive. Pat folded the paper, her eyes warm but knowing. "Do you miss them?" I took a slow sip of tea. "I miss what I thought they were. But missing illusions is a waste of energy." Her gaze flicked toward the window. "She'll try again, you know. People like Lauren always do." "I know," I said. "But the difference now is that she'll have to knock." Pat's smile curved into something proud. "You've earned your quiet, Ellie." The phone rang then. Not a cell phone buzz, but the sharp traditional tone from the landline on my counter. I crossed the room and answered. "Eleanor." Victor's voice came through, smooth and measured as ever. "Just my Monday check-in. Everything remains sealed. No breaches, no legal inquiries, no filings. You're as protected as a person can be." "Even from family?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He paused. "Especially from family." I exhaled, feeling the satisfaction settle deep. "Thank you, Victor. And the charitable reallocation forms?" "Ready for your signature," he said. "The Community Foundation has already approved your endowment transfer. You'll be redirecting half your discretionary accounts to the Denver Women's Legal Fund. A fitting choice." Pat's head lifted. "You're making a donation?" "A strategic one," I said, covering the receiver. "Let's make sure the next generation of women understand the law before someone tries to use it against them." Victor continued. "We'll schedule the signing for Thursday. It'll be quiet. No press. Just formal documentation." "Perfect," I said. After the call ended, Pat gave a low whistle. "You're turning your revenge into legacy. I almost envy your efficiency." "It's not efficiency," I said. "It's clarity." Pat laughed. "Clarity looks a lot like vengeance when you do it." I smiled faintly, finishing my tea. "That's because vengeance without clarity is chaos. And I don't do chaos." She went back to reading while I opened my planner. I'd already filled the next few weeks. Foundation meetings, property transfers, new board invitations. Denver's elite loved a comeback story, but what they really adored was the appearance of unshakable serenity. I would give them that, in carefully measured doses. By noon, I'd drafted a short letter for Victor's office to include with the donation paperwork. For the women who are told to stay quiet. May they learn that silence, when used wisely, can be the sharpest weapon of all. Pat read over my shoulder. "That's going to make the donors nervous." "Good," I said, sealing the envelope. "Nerves precede progress." Outside, the snow had stopped. The street gleamed under a fragile light, and I could see my reflection faintly superimposed on the glass. Steady, older, certain. The doorbell rang then, 2 quick chimes. Pat stood to answer it, but I stopped her. "I've got it." When I opened the door, there was no one there. Just a manila envelope resting neatly on the porch, no postage, no return address. Pat appeared behind me. "Another anonymous fan letter?" "Doubtful," I said, crouching to pick it up. The paper was heavier than it looked. Inside, a single clipping from the Denver Post. Headline: "Anonymous source claims scandal at Parker Estate deeper than reported." Beneath it, a handwritten note in black ink. Control is never permanent. Pat's expression hardened. Lauren. I smiled, folding the note carefully and sliding it into the drawer by the door. Maybe. Or maybe someone just needed to remind me that peace isn't supposed to last forever. Pat studied me. You're not worried? I closed the drawer with a soft click. Worried people react. I prepare. Outside, the snow began again, thin, quiet, relentless. And as I poured another cup of tea, the world felt perfectly balanced on that edge between calm and consequence. The next few days unfolded with a strange, almost fragile rhythm. Outside, the snow melted into shallow rivulets along the curbs. Inside, my home hummed with a silence that was both earned and intentional. The envelope from the porch still sat in the drawer by the door, untouched. I'd kept it there on purpose, a reminder that even peace has its price tag. On Thursday morning, Victor arrived in person for the signing. He came without an assistant this time, coat dusted with frost, briefcase in hand. "You've built quite the legend this month," he said with a wry smile as he stepped inside. "Half of Denver seems to think you're the embodiment of restraint. The other half thinks you staged the whole thing." "Both halves are useful," I said. "Perception keeps people predictable." Pat emerged from the living room, mug of coffee in hand. "Good morning, Victor. You know, I've been trying to convince her to enjoy this. She's practically a folktale now." Victor chuckled softly. "Mrs. Parker doesn't celebrate. She consolidates." He wasn't wrong. We settled at the table where the documents lay waiting. Charitable allocations, endowment transfers, reaffirmation of trust protections. Every page was a legal expression of authority, signed not in anger, but in absolute calm. Victor slid the last sheet across to me. "Sign here, and your legacy becomes unalterable." As my pen touched the paper, I asked, "Still no contact from Lauren?" He shook his head. "Nothing official. Though my assistant mentioned a few calls from a reporter claiming to have new information, all of them redirected naturally." "Good," I said. "Let them chase ghosts." Pat smiled. "You always did say revenge isn't about retaliation, it's about management." "Precisely." I handed the papers back to Victor. "And management requires patience." He packed up the briefcase, fastening it with a quiet snap. "Then you'll be glad to know the protections are now fully permanent. There's no clause, no addendum, no loophole that can undo this structure. Even if she tried to drag this through court, it would collapse at filing." Pat raised her mug in mock salute. "To permanence." Victor smiled. "To precision." When he left, the house felt still again, but not empty. It was the kind of stillness that hums with intent, the calm before an action that's already decided. Nathan arrived that evening. He didn't call ahead, but I'd expected him. Some lessons take time to ferment, but they always bring their students back to the door. He looked tired, older. "Mom," he began, setting his gloves on the counter. "She's gone to her sister's in Boulder. Said she needs space." "Good," I said. "So do we." He hesitated. "She wanted me to ask you for a meeting. She says she wants to apologize." Pat, who was arranging flowers at the table, snorted quietly. "Apologies don't come with envelopes from anonymous sources." Nathan's eyes flicked toward her, then back to me. "She said she didn't send that, Mom. The article, the note, it wasn't her." I smiled faintly. "She's lying. Or she's not. Either way, it doesn't matter. The lesson remains the same." He frowned. "Which is?" "That power doesn't disappear just because someone wants it back." He exhaled, sitting down across from me. "You're colder than I remember." "No," I said softly. "Just clear." We sat in silence for a moment. He rubbed his temples. "She says she feels erased." "She erased herself," I replied. "All I did was make it official." Pat looked up from her vase, her tone lighter than the air deserved. It's amazing, really. You try to poison a woman, and she ends up with better press than you ever had. There's a parable in that. Nathan's lips twitched despite himself. You two sound like a board meeting. We prefer to call it strategy, Pat said. He stood, running a hand through his hair. You've made your point, Mom. She knows she can't win. I think she's finally realizing who she's dealing with. That's the first step, I said, standing too. Recognition. But understanding. That takes longer. He looked at me carefully. Are you ever going to forgive her? I met his gaze, my voice quiet but firm. Forgiveness is a luxury. I don't deal in luxuries. Only returns. Pat raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning, I said. It's time to make something useful out of this. Nathan frowned. What do you mean? I turned toward the window where the evening snow was starting again, flakes glowing orange under the streetlights. If the world insists on watching, I might as well give them something worth watching. The Foundation launch dinner moves forward. I'll host it here next month. Same house, same room, same glassware. Pat grinned, understanding immediately. A full circle affair. Exactly, I said. Let them see how control looks when it's redefined as generosity. Nathan sighed, but there was something almost proud beneath it. You really don't stop? I smiled. Would you if you'd spent 70 years learning how to stay unshaken? He kissed my cheek before leaving. You're impossible, Mom. I prefer inevitable. When the door closed, the house returned to its peaceful hum. Pat joined me by the window, watching the snow drift. You know she's going to show up to that dinner, right? I'm counting on it. We stood there for a while, the quiet wrapping around us like silk. Then Pat murmured, You've turned every move she's made into a lesson. I nodded. And she still hasn't learned. The snow thickened outside, blurring the streetlights into halos. Somewhere in that cold, shifting white, I felt it again. The faint thrill of anticipation, because lessons only mattered when the final exam arrived. The night of the Foundation dinner arrived with a kind of deliberate grace, like an overture I'd written months ago, but only now allowed to play. The snow had melted into clean lines along the street, leaving the driveway glassy beneath the floodlights. The house gleamed again, identical to the night of the retirement party, but this time the air carried purpose, not pretense. Pat was fussing with the seating chart at the dining table. You sure you want her name left on the guest list? She asked, glancing at the small white card marked Lauren Parker. Yes, I said. I'd rather offer her a chair than let her pretend she wasn't invited. Pat smirked. You always did prefer an audience for a lesson. The doorbell rang just as the first guests arrived. Victor came in first, crisp as always, his overcoat immaculate and his briefcase a constant accessory. I must say, he greeted with a small smile, your events always manage to rewrite the narrative. That's because I choose the narrative, I replied. He handed me a slim leather folder. Signatures and confirmations, all final. The reallocation is complete. The Denver Women's Legal Fund now holds 20% of your discretionary estate. You've effectively created a perpetual grant in your name, no alteration possible, not even posthumously. Pat whistled softly. So you just became your own monument. Victor smiled, an unassailable one, at that. I opened the folder and ran my fingers over the embossed seal. Each document shimmered faintly in the light, a legal symphony of control. Then tonight, I said, isn't a dinner. It's a statement. By 7, the house was full again, some of the same faces from that fateful night, others new and curious. The laughter was tentative at first, the kind of brittle amusement that masks gossip waiting to happen. I let them settle. Nathan arrived near the end of the first hour, looking uneasy but composed. "You've outdone yourself," he said, kissing my cheek. "The same setup as before?" "History should always repeat itself," I said lightly, "if you've written it correctly the first time." Pat caught his expression and grinned. "Don't worry, Nathan. No drinks have been spiked tonight, unless you count the truth." Victor joined us, clearing his throat. "If I may have everyone's attention," he announced. The conversations dimmed, glasses stilled. "Tonight, we're not celebrating wealth," he continued, his tone poised and deliberate. "We're honoring foresight. Eleanor Parker has transferred a substantial portion of her estate to fund legal education and protection for women in Denver, a permanent endowment that cannot be challenged or altered." Applause rippled through the crowd, soft at first, then building. Nathan looked at me, eyes wide. "You really did it," he said under his breath. "You're giving it away." "I'm investing it differently," I corrected. "Power multiplies when it's distributed properly." And then, almost predictably, the door opened again. Lauren. She stood in the entryway, cautious but defiant, wrapped in a dark coat. Her lipstick was too red, her smile too brittle. Every head turned toward her. Pat muttered, "Showtime." Lauren walked forward slowly, her heels clicking against the hardwood that had witnessed her undoing. "I didn't want to intrude," she said, her voice rehearsed. "But Nathan thought I should see this for myself." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Lauren." "No," I said, cutting gently. "She's right to be here." Victor stepped back, watchful but silent. Lauren's gaze swept over the guests, then landed on me. "You're turning this into a performance," she said, "a way to make yourself look noble." I smiled faintly. "Everything's a performance, Lauren. The difference is who controls the lighting." A few guests chuckled, nervous but entertained. Victor handed me a glass of water, the same gesture he'd made that night. "Would you like to say a few words, Eleanor?" I turned to the crowd, lifting my glass just enough to catch the light. "Only this," I began. "Reputation fades, wealth dissolves. But legacy, that's the only currency that appreciates over time. I've learned that when others try to define your story, you don't argue. You write louder." The applause was steady now, genuine. Cameras flashed. Somewhere behind me, Pat murmured, "Perfectly delivered." Lauren's face stiffened, her fingers clutching her clutch like a weapon. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The moment had outgrown her. I turned toward her gently. "You see, Lauren," I said quietly, "you tried to steal what couldn't be stolen. Not money, not position, authority. And authority doesn't belong to whoever grabs it first, it belongs to whoever keeps it last." Her jaw trembled, but she said nothing. Nathan, his face pale but resolved, stepped forward and touched her arm. "Let's go," he whispered. "You've already lost enough." And for once, she listened. They left without another word. The crowd resumed its conversation, louder this time, because that's what people do when power changes hands. Victor leaned toward me. "She won't try again. Not after this." Pat smiled over her champagne. "Even if she does, the paperwork's bulletproof." I looked around the room, at the friends who now looked at me differently, at the whispered admiration that followed every movement I made, and I realized something simple and absolute. I wasn't untouchable because I'd won. I was untouchable because I'd made my loss impossible. As the last toast faded and the guests began to disperse, I walked to the piano and rested my hand on the polished lid. My reflection stared back at me, older, sharper, unmistakably satisfied. Pat joined me, slipping an arm through mine. "You've turned revenge into philanthropy," she said softly. "You're impossible." I smiled, eyes on my reflection. "I prefer inevitable." The clock chimed 8. The crowd had thinned, but a small envelope sat neatly on the edge of the piano. Cream paper. My name written in familiar, looping script. I opened it. You can give it all away, Eleanor, but you'll never give away what I know. My fingers tightened slightly on the paper. Pat saw my face. Lauren. I folded the note, slipping it into my clutch. Or someone learning from her mistakes. Outside, the snow had started again. Soft, relentless, indifferent. And as the last guest's laughter faded into the cold night, I realized that peace, like charity, always comes with conditions. It began quietly, an op-ed, then a column, then an article that rippled through every professional network in Denver. By the end of the week, the story had a name: the Parker Principle. Victor called it good press. I called it inevitable. I sat at the breakfast table one morning, reading the Denver Chronicle with my usual tea. My name appeared in print more times than I cared to count. A woman of composure, foresight, and unshakable moral gravity. The phrasing made me laugh. No one mentioned the party, not directly. They didn't need to. Denver loved to tell the truth as rumor dressed in pearls. Pat arrived half an hour later, coat dusted with snow. "You're trending," she said, tossing a folded magazine onto the table. "Modern Legacy. They want an interview." I arched a brow. What could they possibly want to ask me? How to weaponize grace? "Something like that," she said, pouring herself coffee. "The headline says, Eleanor Parker, turning scandal into strength." Victor called a moment later, voice smooth and amused. "Congratulations, Eleanor. Your story's officially been canonized. The magazine wants an exclusive on how you handled, well, all of this." "I haven't agreed to anything," I said. "I know," Victor replied. "But I ran a background check on the journalist. She's clean. Serious even. They're positioning you as a model of financial and personal resilience. This is national attention, Eleanor." "National?" Pat mouthed, eyebrows raised. Victor's tone turned quieter. "Just think about it. The feature won't harm you legally. In fact, it'll strengthen your image, and by extension, your foundation's credibility." I said nothing for a moment, just watched the steam curl from my teacup like a silent clock ticking in vapor. "Send me her credentials," I said finally. When I hung up, Pat exhaled. "From courtroom strategy to coffee table covers, you've officially transcended the social ladder." "Legacy isn't about ascent," I murmured. "It's about architecture." Nathan came by that afternoon. His visits had become more frequent. Apologetic, cautious, steeped in something that resembled respect. He lingered by the fireplace, running his hand along the mantel as if searching for the right words. "Lauren's gone," he said quietly. "She packed up and left for California. Said she couldn't breathe here anymore." I folded the magazine on the table. "Then she's finally making a good decision." He sighed. "Mom, don't..." "I'm not gloating, Nathan. I'm relieved. She needed a new stage." He hesitated. "You know, for what it's worth, everyone thinks you handled it brilliantly, the way you never lost control, how you turned it around." "That's not brilliance," I interrupted gently. "It's discipline." He nodded, studying me the way children study a landscape they once took for granted. "You were right about her. About all of it." "I usually am," I said. Nathan smiled faintly, something weary but genuine in his eyes. "The board of the legal fund invited me to attend their next gala. They said it would mean a lot if the Parker family stayed visible." "Then go," I told him. "Learn something about what integrity looks like when it's written in a ledger, not a headline." He laughed softly. "You're impossible to argue with." "That's why people stop trying," I said, smiling. After he left, the house felt light again. No echo of argument, No residual chaos. Just the steady hum of control. Pat joined me later in the evening carrying a small bottle of Cabernet. To legacies, she said, pouring us each a glass. To patience, I countered. We sat by the fire, the magazine still lying between us on the coffee table, my name gleaming under the lamplight. You know, Pat said, you've done what most people only fantasize about. You've turned humiliation into power. Not power, I said. Structure. Power fades when it's personal. Structure lasts because it doesn't need me to hold it. She raised her glass. That's why you'll outlive your enemies in reputation, even if not in years. Reputation is a poor inheritance, I said. But it's an excellent weapon. The next morning, Victor called again, his tone edged with surprise. They've confirmed it. Modern Legacy is putting you on the cover for their Women of Influence issue. Not a profile. A full feature. The title reads, The Matriarch Who Outsmarted Entitlement. I laughed. A low, honest sound. And here I thought the world had grown tired of morality plays. They love a heroine who never flinches, he said, especially one who writes her own script. Pat was already reading over my shoulder as the email came through. A mock-up of the cover. My portrait, photographed at last year's firm gala. Pearls, navy silk, a half smile that said nothing and everything. She grinned. You look like you're about to fire God's accountant. I traced the image with a fingertip. He should have kept better books. Victor's voice softened. Enjoy this, Eleanor. You've earned it. When the call ended, I set the phone down slowly. The morning light caught on the framed photo beside it. Richard and I on our wedding day, smiling into a future we thought we could predict. He'd always said patience was my most dangerous quality. I understood now that he hadn't meant it as a compliment. Pat noticed my stare. You're thinking about him. I'm thinking about time, I said. How much it gives and how much it takes before you learn to use it properly. She reached over, clinking her glass lightly against mine. You've done what you set out to do, Ellie. You've won. I met her gaze, calm and unwavering. Winning isn't the point, Pat. Continuity is. The wind outside began to rise, rattling the window panes like a soft warning. The world beyond my glass fortress still moved, still whispered, still tested. I looked down at the magazine again. In the corner, beneath the headline, a small tagline read, Coming next issue, The Other Parker Speaks. Pat leaned closer, frowning. You think that means? I know exactly what it means, I said. And as the first gust of snow struck the glass, I smiled. Slow, deliberate, certain. Because even legacies, like lessons, need their sequels. The first thaw of March arrived earlier than expected. The snow that had framed every one of my battles was finally retreating, leaving soft patches of green pushing through the frost outside my window. The world looked washed clean, though I knew better. Peace rarely means purity. It means strategy has been executed to completion. Pat was in the sunroom, setting out the porcelain tea set I'd inherited from my grandmother. You know, she said, brushing a wisp of steam from the air, if people saw how calm you were, they'd think you've forgotten what they put you through. I smiled faintly. Forgetting is for the powerless. I prefer remembering selectively. She chuckled, handing me a cup. Still quoting your old firm's training manual, I see. Decades of arbitration leave a mark. The doorbell chimed, a gentle, civilized sound that still made my pulse quicken. Victor was punctual, as always. He stepped inside, shaking off his coat, the faint smell of cold air and cedar trailing behind him. Good afternoon, Eleanor. Patricia. His briefcase clicked open as he sat. Just the usual quarterly review, though I doubt there'll be any surprises. Pat poured his tea before he could reach for it. I've stopped expecting surprises where she's involved, she said, nodding toward me. Victor smiled. Wise. He slid a folder across the table. Inside, confirmations, receipts, certificates of permanence, each one affirming what I already knew. My estate remained untouched. The trusts were untouchable, the charities thriving, the bank accounts immaculate. I assume the protections remain airtight? I asked, though my voice was casual. As solid as ever, he said. In fact, the Denver Women's Legal Fund reports record donations since your feature ran. It seems people admire power that gives back. Pat lifted her teacup in salute. You're the city's new moral compass, Ellie. Who would have guessed revenge could double as social service? I smirked. Redemption narratives sell better than the truth. Victor cleared his throat, professional as ever. Lauren's legal counsel attempted a preliminary inquiry about revisiting the marital trust. I intercepted it before it reached the courthouse. She has no standing, no assets to leverage, and no sympathy from the court. Pat's grin widened. And Nathan? Still quiet, Victor replied. His accounts remain separate but stable. He seems content to keep his distance. I leaned back in my chair. He's learning the difference between autonomy and inheritance. It's a valuable lesson, one his wife never mastered. The afternoon light slanted across the table, golden and soft, turning the legal documents into polished reflections. It struck me how still everything had become. No journalists, no letters, no threats. The noise had moved elsewhere. Pat reached for the sugar bowl, her tone warm but probing. So, what's next on the Empire agenda? I took a thoughtful sip of tea. A scholarship, endowed through the fund, for women in law, specifically arbitration and estate defense. Victor nodded approvingly. A poetic full circle. Poetic, I repeated, but practical. If I've learned anything, it's that control should outlive the person who wielded it. He smiled. You're building permanence, Eleanor. That's the only piece worth having. The conversation drifted to smaller things, spring galas, new donors, the legal fund's growth, but my mind was elsewhere, following the hum of quiet around me. Peace was a performance, and I had perfected the choreography. As Victor packed his papers and rose to leave, he hesitated by the door. There's something you should know, he said, tone careful. The magazine's next issue, the follow-up featuring Lauren, it's been delayed indefinitely. The editors received a cease and desist letter. Anonymous source. Pat's eyebrows lifted. Anonymous, you say? Victor's mouth twitched, betraying amusement. Let's just say the publication won't be pursuing the story again. Ever. He adjusted his coat, gave a respectful nod, and left. When the door clicked shut, Pat turned toward me, eyes narrowed with mock suspicion. Anonymous, huh? I smiled, stirring my tea. Denver's full of mysterious benefactors. She laughed, the sound low and warm. You're incorrigible. I'm prepared, I corrected. That's different. We sat in companionable quiet for a while, sunlight painting long amber stripes across the rug. Outside, the wind was softer now. The city was thawing, and with it, the last traces of winter's bitterness. Pat finally said, You've done it. You've rewritten the entire narrative. No one questions your version anymore. That's the beauty of consistency, I said. Say nothing, act decisively, and let the world write its own applause. She smiled, finishing her cup. And after all this, do you feel at peace? I thought for a moment, then looked toward the window. A pair of children were dragging sleds down the street, their laughter bright and aimless. Peace, I said softly, isn't the goal. It's the byproduct. Pat studied me for a long moment. You know, if I didn't like you, you'd terrify me. I laughed quietly. That's how I know I've done it right. The clock chimed 4. Victor's car disappeared down the hill, and the house settled into its familiar, deliberate quiet. I gathered the signed papers into a neat stack and placed them in the drawer beside the note Lauren had once left me. The words, "You'll never give away what I know," were still there, folded carefully, irrelevant, but intact. I closed the drawer. Some reminders are better kept than discarded. Pat poured the last of the tea and murmured, "It's funny, isn't it? You've built a fortress out of generosity." "Fortresses built from kindness," I said, "are the hardest to tear down." We sat there a while longer, two women surrounded by sunlight, porcelain, and the faint echo of victory. And just as I began to stand, the doorbell rang again. Once, sharp and insistent. Pat frowned. "Expecting someone?" "No," I said, smoothing the sleeve of my blouse. Through the frosted glass, I saw the outline of a delivery courier holding a thick envelope. Official, embossed, government sealed. I opened the door. From State Attorney's Office, Denver County. Subject: Inquiry regarding the Parker Foundation's financial allocations. The seal gleamed under the light. My breath didn't quicken. It steadied. Behind me, Pat whispered, "Another test?" "Perhaps," I said, breaking the seal cleanly. "Or perhaps a reminder that peace was never meant for everyone." The invitation had gone out quietly, just a small gathering at the house, to celebrate the successful audit resolution, as Victor phrased it. I'd chosen my words carefully. No one needed to know that the inquiry from the state attorney's office had ended before it began. They'd found no irregularities, no gaps, no trail to follow. Everything had been as it always was. Perfect on paper, airtight in execution. The guests began to arrive just after 6. The same faces that had witnessed my humiliation months earlier now filed through my door with smiles too wide and compliments too practiced. They carried wine bottles, chocolates, handwritten notes, peace offerings disguised as pleasantries. Pat moved through the room like an orchestra conductor, ensuring the tone remained light. "Can you believe this woman?" she said, gesturing toward me. "A government audit, and she still comes out looking like a saint." Victor stood by the fireplace, composed as ever. "Not luck," he said to a small circle of guests. "Structure. Mrs. Parker's documents could withstand a nuclear winter." I allowed myself a small smile at that. Structure had become my shield. And, in its way, my revenge. Nathan arrived late, alone. His expression was careful, though not hostile. I'd learned to recognize that kind of restraint. It meant he understood now the futility of opposition. "You look well," he said softly. "I usually do when things go according to plan." He smiled, faintly ashamed of his amusement. "Lauren wanted to come." "She shouldn't have." He hesitated. "She's outside." I set down my glass, the weight of it a subtle punctuation. "Then you'd better bring her in before the neighbors start wondering." When the door opened, the air seemed to change. Lauren stepped inside, her posture immaculate, her smile almost believable. She wore black. Clever choice, I thought, the color of formality and self-preservation. "Eleanor," she said, voice steady, "thank you for allowing me to attend." "You are always welcome," I replied, "provided you behave." A quiet ripple of discomfort passed through the nearby guests. But I didn't flinch. Neither did she. Victor, ever the sentinel, crossed the room to greet her. "Mrs. Parker," he said politely, "I trust California has treated you well?" Her jaw flexed. Lovely weather. Less forgiving people. "Forgiveness," Victor said smoothly, "is overrated in legal affairs." Pat caught my eye from across the room and raised a single eyebrow, the silent signal we'd shared since our first courtroom victory together decades ago. Keep control. I turned toward the bar, where a row of crystal glasses gleamed beneath the chandelier. Champagne, club soda, sparkling cider. Every bottle uncorked, every pour accounted for. I'd made sure of it. When Lauren joined me, she glanced toward the drinks. Still keeping an eye on everything? Old habits, I said. And you know how I feel about surprises. She let out a dry laugh, brittle as glass. You really think I came here to start something? No, I said, pouring her a glass. You came here to see how much of you I've already erased. Her hand froze on the stem. You think you've won? I think I've outlasted you. Nathan appeared beside us, voice quiet, strained. Mom, please. Not tonight. But it wasn't confrontation. It was punctuation. The final one in a sentence I'd been writing for months. Across the room, Victor cleared his throat. Before we toast, he said, I want to confirm, for anyone still curious, that the state's inquiry is officially closed. The Foundation remains in full compliance. Mrs. Parker's estate is both protected and exemplary. Applause followed. Subtle, restrained, but real. The sound filled the spaces where doubt used to live. Pat clinked her spoon against her glass. To Eleanor, she said, smiling. The only woman I've ever met who could turn a scandal into a seminar. Laughter rippled through the crowd, and I raised my own glass. Lauren stood opposite me now, her gaze locked on mine, daring me to look away. I didn't. To continuity, I said, and to clarity. Our glasses met with the faintest chime, sharp, deliberate. I didn't drink. She did. The silence that followed wasn't shock or suspicion. It was surrender. Lauren set her glass down too quickly, her reflection trembling in the polished surface of the bar. She blinked once, then again, as if the room had grown too bright. Nathan caught her arm, confusion and worry blending in his voice. Lauren, are you all right? She steadied herself, swallowing hard. I'm fine, she said, but the edge in her voice betrayed her. Pat drifted closer, her smile soft but knowing. Careful, she murmured. You wouldn't want to lose your footing twice. The guests, unaware of the deeper current beneath our politeness, continued their chatter. Only Victor and Pat knew what they were watching, a quiet reenactment, a controlled reminder. Lauren looked at me, eyes wide with realization. You didn't... No, I said evenly. But you remember how it felt, don't you? Not knowing what you'd done to yourself until it was too late. Her throat tightened. She reached for Nathan's hand, but he didn't move. I set my untouched glass on the table, perfectly still. Some lessons, I said softly, require repetition. Victor stepped forward, breaking the tension with practiced ease. A beautiful evening, Mrs. Parker, he said to me, offering the faintest nod. As always, everything is in order. Pat raised her cup in quiet triumph. To order, she echoed. The guests followed, their admiration sincere, their ignorance intact. Lauren stood frozen, the memory of her own undoing playing out behind her eyes. The applause blurred around her, a sound she could never reclaim. And I smiled. Not cruelly, but with the kind of grace that comes only when the game is finally over. Because there, in that glittering room, surrounded by those who'd doubted and those who'd learned, I understood the balance had at last settled exactly where it belonged. I lifted my gaze, met hers one last time, and said quietly enough for only her to hear. She spiked my drink. I watched her sip it first, and finally she understood who was in charge.